Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The case of the Kyoto Animation Studio massacre. On the morning of July 18, 2019, thousands of Japanese people in the city of Kyoto were surprised in the middle of their usual morning activities by a very unusual event. That morning, out of nowhere, the entire city could hear the sound of multiple ambulances and fire trucks racing through Kyoto with their sirens blaring, startling the entire population. Most Japanese who witnessed the massive mobilization of ambulances and patrols couldn't help but wonder what could be the cause of this, while simultaneously thinking that whatever it was, it had to be something serious because all these vehicles seemed to be heading to the same location, disregarding the usual heavy traffic in Kyoto mid-morning, causing all cars and bicycles on the road to give way to the authorities. By 11 a.m. on this summer morning, it became apparent to the population that indeed, all this professional equipment was heading to the same building. Emergency services had received multiple calls reporting an explosion heard around 10:30 in the morning, and the worst part was that the building was reported to be engulfed in flames. As the fire quickly spread throughout the first floor, most of the people inside couldn't escape the flames. This place was an office complex belonging to the company Kyoto Animation, an animation studio founded in 1981 that had produced various anime and manga novels of all kinds. Throughout its history, it has released great works that have captivated both Japanese and international audiences due to its high production standards. Alerted by the calls they had received, which evidenced the severity of the situation, the emergency services instructed all available personnel to arrive at the scene as quickly as possible. When they arrived at the building, the situation looked much worse than expected. Several neighbors who lived nearby were observing the scene from what they thought was a safe distance while they waited for the firefighters and paramedics. The scene of the fire was, to put it mildly, disheartening. The flames enveloped the entire building and leaked out of the windows, creating long tongues of fire that immediately hindered the efforts of the firefighters trying to contain the fire and rescue those who were still trapped inside what had become a deadly concrete trap. The police officers began to instruct the neighbors to move further away from the scene, as in many cases of fires and explosions, there was a significant possibility that the building could collapse. According to reports at the time, there were 73 company employees working there at the moment of the fire. From the moment they set foot on the street, the paramedics knew they had a lot of work to do, because even the employees who had managed to escape the offices were now at the foot of the burning building, seriously injured, some unable to move or unconscious. Most of them had suffered terrible injuries and cuts while trying to exit the building. The most terrible part was that most of them had severe third-degree burns. These are classified as such because they affect the deepest layers of the skin and require immediate medical attention, as they have a high risk of infection. Additionally, when a person has these burns in multiple parts of their body, or almost entirely, as was the case with some of these studio workers, the chances of losing their life are very high. For this reason, it was crucial that the workers receive timely treatment, so emergency doctors began to separate the injured according to the severity of their injuries in order to assist those who needed urgent medical help. This way, the most affected individuals began to be stabilized before being transported to the hospital by ambulance. At this point, The number of severely injured people was so high that more than 30 ambulances had to be mobilized in total to transport the victims of the supposed accident. It's important to clarify that the authorities believed before arriving at the scene that this was an accidental fire. However, what was happening just a block away from the scene would give a very drastic twist to this story. Just 100 meters from the burning building, some police officers from a nearby train station were detaining a man who had been chased there by Kyoto Animation employees. The man had serious burns on his face and various parts of his body. This raised several questions because why would the authorities subdue a man who appeared to be a victim of the fire? In addition to all this, multiple witnesses were reporting to the police officers present at the scene that they had seen a man enter the animation studio around 10:30 that morning with what appeared to be bottles of gasoline. So with this and the testimonies of the survivors of the tragedy who were conscious, the authorities understood that this was an arson attack and therefore a mass murder. When the firefighters were able to control the fire enough to enter the building and analyze the scene, they observed that the death toll of this tragedy had risen to 34 people. Shortly after, it would increase to 36, as 2 of the injured, suffering from the effects of their burns, could not endure any longer and lost their lives. The man was arrested, as the same employees who had pursued him claimed that he was responsible, and the same police officers who had arrested him during his transfer to the hospital testified that this man began shouting that yes, he was the one who had caused the fire at Kyoto Animation, justifying it by saying that everyone inside deserved to die because they had stolen his work without giving him any recognition. Once at the hospital, the first thing known was that the suspect's name was Shinji Aoba, and he was 41 years old. He had many injuries covering his entire body from the fire he allegedly caused. Once his wounds had healed enough for him to be kept in a cell without dying from an infection, a lengthy interrogation awaited him so that the entire country and the world would have an idea of what motivated him to commit such a horrible crime. Not much is known about this man's childhood, as his parents were born in a small village. Shinji's maternal grandfather was an honorable man who had taken on 2 jobs simultaneously to support his family. He mainly worked transporting goods by cart to Tokyo. He was considered a very kind and hardworking man, until one day he was diagnosed with advanced cancer and, unable to afford the treatment that would save him, he made the decision to take his own life to avoid burdening his family with the responsibility of helping him. Shinji's mother would meet the man who would become the father of her children during her adolescence. The problem arose because this man was almost 17 years older than her when they met, and it was known that he was married at the time. As a result, the woman's family strongly disapproved of their relationship, which is a very serious matter in Japan, as Japanese society places a significant emphasis on appearances. However, against all odds, she escaped from her parents' home, never to return. After running away, she started working in a factory near Kyoto, and eventually, she got married with the older man. The couple had 3 children, of whom there is only information available about Shinji and his sister. After leading what seemed to be a relatively normal life, it appears that Shinji's mother wanted some excitement and began an affair with a much younger man than her husband. When she was caught, she left home, leaving her husband, who earned a living as a taxi driver, completely alone and responsible for their 3 children. This continued to be the family's normal life until 1999, when a car accident left the father paralyzed. He was subsequently fired from the taxi company where he worked, leaving the man, who was already struggling to make ends meet, without the possibility of working to pay rent and provide food for his 3 children. Faced with this overwhelming pressure and distress, the man made the tragic decision to end it all. Despite all this, up to a certain point, Shinji had led a relatively normal life in his youth. Nothing out of the ordinary happened during his high school years, and he even worked part-time as a document clerk for the government. After graduating, Shinji continued to work part-time at a supermarket, and when he reached his 20s, he decided to move to another city. Everything seemed to be going relatively well until his mother's disappearance and his father's death, which slowly caused his life to crumble. The young man increasingly lacked motivation to move forward, and just when he thought things couldn't get any worse, life dealt him another blow. Shinji's sister, about whom little information is available, was almost at the point of losing hope. On that day, this woman visited a temple in the city, where she started talking to a priest about all the pain she had suffered in recent years. She then prayed for the repose of her father's soul before leaving the temple without saying a word. The next day after this visit, her lifeless body was found in a hostel near the temple she had visited, and she was determined to be the cause of her own tragic ending. After his sister's death, Shinji's life began to spiral downhill. His mental and economic problems led him to commit a robbery in 2012, where he managed to escape with around 20,000 yen in his bag. However, he was arrested shortly afterward and subsequently sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. Upon his release, Shinji became a complete social outcast. Nobody wanted anything to do with him. He had no family or friends, and he struggled to maintain any relationships due to his violent temper. This isolation led him to withdraw completely into his apartment. Like a significant portion of the Japanese population, Shinji loved manga and anime. Since childhood, he had dreamt of becoming a manga writer. Faced with a bleak future and difficulties finding employment, Shinji decided to pursue his dream. He began writing light novels and drawing manga panels. At this point, Shinji's story intersects with that of Kyoto Animation, a company with an excellent reputation not only in Japan, but also internationally. Kyoto Animation's specialty is depicting the wonders and dilemmas of everyday life. In other words, they create works with characters that look childlike or relatable, making it easy for viewers to connect with them quickly. However, they often incorporate plot twists that can leave you in tears. Every year, this animation company holds a manga and novel writing contest, where enthusiasts submit their works in the hopes of getting them published or adapted by the studio, or even turned into a big-screen production. In 2018, Shinji submitted one of his novels for the contest, following all the specified steps. However, despite constantly checking his email for responses, he received no reply from the animation studio. As the days passed, 40-year-old Shinji felt that his hope of becoming a successful manga writer was slipping through his fingers. Several months later, on one of those afternoons when all Shinji did was watch anime and play video games, he started watching an anime produced by Kyoto Animation. The show told the story of high school students who were involved in long-distance shooting sports. That very afternoon, Shinji felt humiliated because he realized that his idea had been stolen. Yes, you heard it right. A giant studio worth millions of dollars had allegedly stolen his story, without giving him the slightest credit. Maybe they didn't steal his entire manga idea, but they had apparently lifted a scene directly from his work. Shinji was outraged because he believed that in the submission he had sent to Kyoto Animation, there was a rather inconsequential scene in which the anime's protagonists were in a supermarket buying discounted meat. According to him, this scene was identical to one in an episode of the show that had aired that week. The scene was quite generic and nothing out of the ordinary. However, likely due to his unstable mental state and isolation, Shinji couldn't stop obsessing over the idea that his idea had been stolen. He was filled with anger, wondering how they could have not even bothered to respond to his contest submission and had apparently taken advantage of his creativity without giving him the slightest credit. In reality, according to the studio, Shinji's novel submission had not passed the first elimination round conducted by the contest judges, which was why they hadn't bothered to contact him. Nevertheless, from the very beginning, Shinji demonstrated that he wasn't mentally well and acted on the belief that he had been personally attacked and blatantly robbed. All of this brings us to July 14, 2019, 4 days before the fire. 9 months earlier, Shinji had sent anonymous threats to Kyoto Animation, threatening them with death. Over 200 emails had been sent, and although employees had reported this to the police, nothing could be done because the emails were encrypted, and Shinji had waited for them to let their guard down. On that Sunday, a neighbor heard Shinji starting to hit the shared wall between their apartments. These two lived in apartments where every sound from the other side could be heard. Shinji, among them, used to be the noisiest, and they would occasionally bang on the walls to request silence from one another. However, this time, it turned out that the neighbor from the apartment above was moving, and consequently, they were the cause of the noise. The neighbor went to knock on Shinji's door, intending to explain that he wasn't the one making the noise, and to please stop banging on the wall. Before he had a chance to speak, Shinji angrily opened the door, grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, and yelled at him, "You're making too much noise. Shut up, or I'll kill you." Faced with this aggression, all of the neighbor's feelings turned to horror. From Shinji's demeanor, it was evident that he was perfectly capable of carrying out his threat. Without hesitation, he left the scene and called the police to report the assault. However, when the officers arrived at Shinji's apartment, he was already gone. It seems that this incident was the spark that would lead Shinji to commit his final act. The next day, Shinji took a bullet train to travel to Tokyo. He stayed in a hotel, and then, on Tuesday, headed to Kyoto, his final destination, where he stayed in another hotel. Several security cameras captured him in the areas near the animation studio. Several neighbors also remembered him clearly after the incident because Shinji wore the same red t-shirt and light jeans for all 4 days. Shinji spent several hours walking until he stopped at a store and bought a shopping cart. He then proceeded to a gas station where he bought 10 gallons of gasoline. With these supplies, Shinji stashed the cart and went to sleep, ready to carry out his evil plan early the next morning. On July 18, 2019, Shinji returned to the animation studio building around 10:30 in the morning, carrying his containers filled with gasoline. Upon entering, he blocked the 12 emergency exits and began to douse the studio with gasoline, taking advantage of the building's limited security, as such incidents are quite rare in Japan. Once everything was ready, Shinji struck a match, and everything started to burn. When the first people realized there was a fire, they attempted to escape through the emergency exits, but they were blocked. They ran towards the central exit where Shinji was present, still holding a gasoline container, and he began to douse the employees trying to escape while saying the word "die." This caused many people to run out into the street engulfed in flames. In just a moment, smoke had already reached the second floor of the building, and for those inside, it was too late to evacuate without suffering injuries. The building was completely engulfed in smoke in less than 2 minutes, making it difficult to breathe, and gradually, the animation studio workers began to lose consciousness due to the lack of oxygen. Most of the company's employees were on the top floor because the attack occurred during a meeting with executives from another company. It's unclear if Shinji planned this to claim more victims, but unfortunately, that day there were more people in the building than usual. To make matters worse, shortly after, an explosion rocked the building, causing the flames to burst through the windows and doors of the studio. The police believe that the combination of air and flames led to the explosion. As the fire grew, people inside the building tried to escape the flames. The majority of the victims, specifically 19 of them, were found on the 3rd floor near the stairs leading to the emergency exit on the roof. These individuals unknowingly ended up on this staircase, which acted like an oven. After causing this hellish scene, Shinji accidentally set himself on fire with the same gasoline he had used to try to burn his victims. This led him to flee the scene, but an employee of Kyoto Animation did not accept this and started to chase him. Eventually, they all ended up at a train station located 100 meters from where Shinji was finally apprehended by 2 police officers from the same station. The fire was completely extinguished after 5 hours of immense efforts by the police and firefighters. It was at this point that the authorities were able to accurately count the victims of the incident. In this attack, 36 people lost their lives, while another 34 were left with serious injuries. Of the deceased, 28 died from carbon monoxide poisoning, 6 succumbed to their burns, and 2 passed away while receiving medical treatment at the hospital.